The rain had been falling for days across southern China, but by the time the rivers finally burst their banks, the disaster had already become impossible to stop. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath muddy water, highways turned into fast-moving rivers, and rescue boats replaced cars on streets that only days earlier had been filled with ordinary life. For thousands of families, the flood was already terrifying enough. But hidden beneath the surface, another danger was about to emerge, one that nobody expected. As floodwaters spread across Guangxi Province in July 2026, emergency crews focused on evacuating stranded residents and searching for people trapped inside flooded buildings. Every hour brought new reports of collapsed roads, submerged farmland, and rising water levels. Yet amid the chaos, local authorities received a series of alarming calls. Residents weren't just seeing floating debris, they were spotting large snakes swimming through streets, gardens, and even inside homes. At first, many people assumed the flood had simply forced wild snakes out of their natural habitats. That happens during major floods in many parts of the world, as rising water drives wildlife to higher ground. But something about these sightings seemed different. The number of snakes being reported increased rapidly, and witnesses described seeing multiple snakes in the same locations. Some of them appeared unusually large, while others were identified as highly venomous species rarely encountered in such numbers. The mystery was solved when officials traced the sightings to a nearby commercial snake breeding facility that had been overwhelmed by the flood. The powerful currents had destroyed fences, damaged enclosures, and carried hundreds of captive snakes into the surrounding countryside. Instead of remaining safely contained, they were suddenly scattered across villages, fields, canals, and residential neighborhoods already struggling to survive the flooding. Among the escaped reptiles were Chinese cobras, one of the country's most medically significant venomous snakes, along with other species raised for traditional medicine, scientific research, and the legal reptile trade. Under normal conditions, these animals were kept inside controlled environments by trained handlers. But once the flood tore through the facility, there was no barrier left between the snakes and the communities outside. For the people living in the flood zone, the emergency instantly became far more complicated. Every step through knee-deep water carried a new uncertainty. A piece of floating wood could actually be a snake. A pile of debris could suddenly come alive. Rescue workers now faced two simultaneous disasters: saving lives from rising floodwaters while trying to prevent dangerous encounters with hundreds of escaped reptiles that had vanished into the muddy landscape. Within hours, local emergency officials issued urgent warnings across the affected communities. Residents were told to avoid walking through floodwater whenever possible, wear protective boots if they had to leave their homes, and never attempt to capture a snake on their own. The danger wasn't just that the reptiles had escaped, it was that nobody knew exactly where they had gone. Flood currents had carried them in every direction, making it impossible to predict where they might appear next. Specialized snake handling teams were quickly deployed alongside flood rescue crews. Armed with snake hooks, capture poles, heavy protective gear, and secure transport containers, they searched through submerged farmland, drainage canals, abandoned buildings, and residential neighborhoods. Every report from a frightened resident had to be treated as a potential emergency, because even a single venomous bite could become life-threatening if medical treatment was delayed by flooded roads. For many families, the fear became deeply personal. Parents refused to let their children play outside, even after the rain began to ease. Farmers hesitated to return to their fields, unsure whether venomous snakes were hiding beneath floating vegetation or inside damaged irrigation channels. In some neighborhoods, people carefully inspected every doorway, every pile of debris, and even the inside of parked vehicles before getting close. The flood had transformed familiar places into landscapes filled with uncertainty. The escape also raised difficult questions about the growing snake breeding industry in parts of China. Thousands of snakes are legally raised for traditional medicine, scientific research, and commercial products under regulated conditions. These facilities are designed to keep dangerous animals securely contained, but natural disasters can overwhelm even well-built enclosures. The flooding exposed how quickly a controlled environment can become a public safety crisis when extreme weather strikes without warning. Officials worked to recover as many escaped snakes as possible, but the task proved incredibly difficult. Muddy water reduced visibility to almost nothing, while dense vegetation and damaged structures created endless hiding places. Some snakes were safely captured within days, yet authorities acknowledged that others had likely dispersed into nearby wetlands, forests, and agricultural land, making a complete recovery nearly impossible. Although reports of escaped cobras captured international headlines, experts reminded the public that panic could be just as dangerous as the snakes themselves. Misidentifying harmless species, spreading false rumors online, or taking unnecessary risks often creates additional emergencies during disasters. Even so, one fact remained impossible to ignore. A flood that had already devastated homes and communities had unexpectedly released hundreds of captive reptiles into the same landscape, turning an already dangerous natural disaster into a far more unpredictable crisis. As the floodwaters slowly began to recede, the search entered an entirely new phase. Rescue operations gradually shifted toward recovery, but snake capture teams remained on high alert. Every day brought fresh reports from residents who claimed to have spotted snakes inside storage sheds, along riverbanks, beneath piles of flood debris, and even in homes that had only recently become accessible again. While some sightings turned out to be harmless species, others involved venomous snakes that required trained professionals to remove safely. For wildlife experts, the situation highlighted a predictable consequence of extreme flooding. Snakes naturally seek dry ground when their habitats become submerged, often bringing them into close contact with people. But this disaster was different because it combined displaced wild reptiles with hundreds of escaped captive snakes from a commercial breeding facility. Distinguishing between the two became almost impossible, making every reported sighting a potential public safety concern. Medical authorities also prepared for the possibility of snakebite emergencies. Hospitals in affected areas reviewed treatment protocols, ensured anti-venom supplies were available, and reminded healthcare workers to respond quickly if patients arrived with suspected venomous bites. At the same time, officials urged residents to remain calm, avoid handling any snake they encountered, and immediately contact emergency services instead of trying to remove the animal themselves.